The next thing to consider when you are writing your research essay is how to establish the significance of your claim. Remember, the claim was the heart of your thesis statement. You started with a concession. You conceded something to your opponent. So you said, okay, I can see why you might think this. However, this is the way it really is. And that part right there is your claim. We need to establish why that claim is so significant. Basically, what that means is, why does it matter? I like to describe significance to my students as answering the question, so what? Okay? That's what it means in a nutshell. But let's go on further to dissect what it means to establish claim significance. The place where you're going to establish that is in the introduction. Okay? You need to tell your reader from the very beginning of your essay why what you're arguing matters. Otherwise, why should they bother reading the rest of your essay? Why should they invest that time and really consider what you're trying to sell to them? Your perspective, not literally selling. So let's take a look at this point by point. So in their introduction, the writer provides the basic information that's necessary to understand and believe their claim. And this is often referred to as background information. Okay? You have to tell them a little bit of background information about whatever topic you're talking about in order for them to get a foothold to where they can even potentially be sold to your perspective. So we have to establish some background information first. And then after that's done, the writer makes it very clear to their reader why this topic matters. Okay? And they do that in a couple of ways. They connect to a general audience. Okay? And what that means is make sure that you're casting a wide net so that anybody can read and understand your topic and therefore and establish their interest in it and then potentially be convinced by the argument that you're making. If you're writing about engineering, okay, you have to keep in mind that a lot of people don't know a lot about engineering, and maybe you don't either, but until you did your research, right? But you are presenting this research, so you have to make this connection to everybody, whether they're an engineer or not, okay? And I'll show you an example so you can see how that's done. Or something medical that could be very specific that not a lot of people know about, but you have to make a connection with everybody, why this matters to them, even if they're not a doctor or an engineer. You also need to express urgency. Urgency means, if you know the word urgent, would be like the root word, means it matters now. Okay, we need to deal with this now. If you make the reader feel like this has to be handled right now, whatever you're arguing for needs to be dealt with right now, then they're going to be more interested, okay, than if it's something that's like, well, we can take care of this whenever. The writer discusses the opponent's viewpoint. Remember, this is the concession part. So you do need to mention that concession before you drop your thesis, okay, which starts with a concession. So if you have a sentence or two leading into your thesis statement where you, and I'll talk about this more in a second, where you mention the opponent, then that's going to be less abrupt than if you suddenly concede something to their side in this concession in your thesis. Then you drop the thesis statement, and that all happens in the introduction. Okay? This is sort of a separate point here. It shouldn't say in the introduction for this part. But it's important that even though you establish that claim significance in the introduction, that you reinforce that significance in the conclusion. So you establish it in the beginning, and then you reinforce it, meaning you explain all over again, you really hit it home why this matters so much in the conclusion of your essay. So we're going to be talking about introductions and conclusions, as you can imagine. That's what this part of your junior project grading is all about. So establishing claim significance, how can you do it? Now that we know what it means, let's talk about how you can do it. First, you need to understand the anatomy of an introduction, and I kind of alluded to it in the previous slide, but here's kind of a visual for us visual people. Imagine your introduction as a funnel, like you would put oil into a car with, okay? It's got a big broad top, and then it's got a little skinny bottom, and it leads from that broad part into that skinny bottom part. That's sort of one way to visualize how an introduction should be. So the very broad part, the wide mouth of the funnel, is the broad topic where you introduce your broad topic. So your broad topic is generally going to be whatever your academy is, okay, because you picked your topic based on your academy. And then you're going to give some background information about that broad topic. Then you're going to move into something more specific. This is where you get into the significance. Why does this broad topic matter? What does the opponents think about this topic? And then you get most specific by dropping your thesis statement. So your thesis is going to be about, so pretend, for example, your very broad topic was health, because you're in the health academy. So the healthcare industry, the medical industry, that sort of thing. But your thesis is very specifically about perhaps the best way to treat pancreatic cancer, treatments, options for pancreatic cancer. That's a very specific thing. If you think about the broad spectrum of medical care, that includes so many things. It includes lots of diseases, not just cancer. Cancer is only one disease, and pancreatic cancer is one specific type of cancer. So you can see how you're starting very broad and then getting more specific until you drop your thesis, which is very, very specific. So let's look at an example that follows this same color coding scheme. Now, I wrote mine. I didn't want to write an introductory paragraph about any specific topic that anybody in here could have possibly chosen, but I wanted to give you an example. So I picked reading, okay, the value of reading, because I knew that that doesn't relate to anybody's academy. Most likely nobody's going to be writing about this topic. So here's a broad topic and background information sentence. This is the kind of thing I'm looking for, and honestly this is half a sentence because it's a very long first sentence, because that's just how Miss Harrison is. You know I'm wordy. So I start by saying, whether a person is browsing the internet, shopping at a grocery store, or checking their email, they are reading. Reading is one of the first skills that children begin learning in school. So you can see here that all I'm doing is introducing the very broad topic of reading and talking about some background information that relates to it. And now I'm going to get into the significance. Why does reading matter? And what is my opponent's viewpoint is what I'm eventually going to touch on in this section. So I said, first skills that children begin learning in school, and I continue in the sentence, and with good reason. It's incredibly difficult to function in our society as an illiterate person. Written text serves many practical functions of basic communication, such as showing people where to board and exit a subway train, labeling food, conducting business via emails, and detailing medical records. Reading serves less obvious functions as well, in the guise of pleasure reading. When people voluntarily read fiction, their brains perform multiple complicated and important tasks. People often make the claim that reading requires time or a capacity for concentration that they simply do not have. So you can see the significance. I'm talking about why reading is so important right here. I list lots of reasons. It's difficult to function because it serves for basic communication, shows people how to, it helps people with traveling, with picking out what food they're going to eat, conducting business. It helps in our medical industry. But then I move into the significance of the type of reading that I'm actually going to be talking about. I say that reading fiction is very important as well. And then I get into my opponent's viewpoint here, where I say people often make the claim that reading requires time or capacity for concentration that they simply do not have. So if I said reading is the most important, which is what I'm about to get into, this is what I imagine my opponent would say. They would say, I don't have time to read. I can't concentrate enough to read. And then I'm going to drop my thesis. So this is the most specific part, and see that it's broken up between concession, claim, and reasons. Although reading does require time and practice, it is the most beneficial cognitive exercise because it builds empathy, increases attention span, and improves written communication skills. So you can see the funnel at work here. And of course, I'm going to attach this slideshow in the learning playlist, so if you want to study this more and use it as a template as you write your own, you are welcome to do that. The next thing we need to talk about with how you can establish claim significance is the conclusion. Because as I said before, it's very important that you reestablish or reinforce the importance of your claim in the conclusion itself. Okay, so the reverse funnel is what we use for the conclusion. So take that same funnel that you used in your introduction and flip it upside down, because you are going to start with their most specific point and you're going to broaden out and then broaden out again. And here's what that means. You start by rephrasing the thesis claim. Okay, so just the claim, the heart of your thesis. You don't have to, at this point, deliver the opponent's point of view, because you've already, in the body of your essay at this point, you have already proven to your reader that yes, your opponent might have had their perspective, which was legitimate in its own way, but your perspective wins out. You've already proven that at this point when you've gotten to your conclusion, so you don't need to rephrase that part of it. And you need to give your claim again in other words, and then reinforce your reasons. And then after that, you're going to give me, or your reader, a smaller scale, and I'll explain through example what I mean by this, a smaller scale significance followed by the significance of your argument on its largest scale. So like, what are the smaller scale implications of your argument and what is the largest scale implication of your argument? So let's look at an example of a reverse funnel conclusion. So starting by rephrasing the claim and the reasons, I would say, although reading serves many practical functions, so-called pleasure reading can be equally beneficial. Reading fiction can actually make people care more about one another and can exercise the brain in ways that helps with overall focusing and writing abilities. So I've just reworded my claim and my 3 reasons here. And then I have this sort of connecting sentence to my next thought, and that's okay. Many people stop this sort of reading at a young age. I needed to say that so that when I get into my significance on a smaller scale, it makes sense. So I continue. If schools and parents did more to encourage a lifelong habit of reading, many people would reap the benefits. This matters most of all because society overall could be smarter, both socially and intellectually. And then if I follow that to its logical conclusion on its largest scale, I could say, in this way, reading can build a better world. So the smaller scale is I'm talking about individuals. If individual people were encouraged by their individual teachers and parents to establish a lifelong habit of reading, okay, then many people would reap the benefits. They would individually reap the benefits, true. But then also society overall would benefit, so our culture in the United States socially and intellectually would benefit. And then if we follow that all the way out, if everybody did this worldwide, then the world itself could be improved, is the claim I'm making. So you can sort of follow that model in your conclusion. So on a smaller scale, how would things look if people took you at your word and followed your advice? And then on its very largest scale, what could things be like if everybody followed your thesis claim? So I should have said this at the beginning of the video, but it does say it in your learning playlist. But right here is where you should have been taking notes as you watched this presentation, and you can fine-tune your notes as you flip through the presentation that I'm attaching here. But these notes are to guide you as you write, which is your next task, your introduction, and then later on your conclusion, to make sure that you are truly establishing the significance of your claim.